Sehr geehrter Herr
President of the Austrian National Council, President of the Austrian Federal Council, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's a great honor for me to welcome you most cordially to our conference in Vienna. It's my special pleasure, and I'm really proud of having the honor to spend 2 days with you and to chair this conference. Without any further delay, I would like to ask the President of the Austrian National Council, Wolfgang SOBOTKA, to take the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, participants of this Fiscal Compact Conference, which was introduced in 2013, I too would like to welcome you cordially on behalf of the Austrian National Council. My special welcome goes to the members of the individual finance and economic committees. We're going to have 4 sessions, each dedicated to an important topic that is going to determine the future of the European Union. I think at parliamentary level, such deliberations are very important because they make sure that what Europe is all about is also seen and understood in the individual member states, and considerations and ideas going on in the member states are thus communicated to the European level. Discussions at the European Parliament are also impacted by these ideas. The 4 topics of our 4 sessions of particular importance. I would like to focus on one of them only, particularly regarding innovation, investment, and education as drivers for a more competitive Europe. I think this is particularly important. When we look at the situation worldwide, we find that in the current situation, the United States, Asia, China in particular, and Europe, as well as Africa, these are economic regions that are competing with each other, and I think customs, punitive tariffs are certainly no positive perspective for the future. We don't want new protectionist barriers. I think competitiveness should be enhanced on the basis of one's own potential. Europe, no matter from which perspective you look at it, is not a region marked by low-cost products. Europe can't compete on a price basis, and Europe will not protect its markets through protectionist measures. I think we have to rely on this generation and on future generations, well-educated generations, to remain competitive. So we have to motivate young people to get involved in economics, in basic and fundamental research, to reach a stage of qualification that can enrich Europe. I think Europe will remain a driver of worldwide developments on that basis. However, when we look at recent years, particularly the economy, and we find that for the rating agencies, the United States is the dominant player. This is something we don't quite share, and of course we are lagging behind in terms of high tech and internet technology. Big data could be one of our most crucial topics, and for that we need education and training if we want to be present as Europe. This also means that we have to cooperate with others at an international level. And for us, it means, above all, to do our utmost to encourage our young people, to get them interested in what we call the MINT subjects, mathematics, physics, natural sciences. We want them to get interested in these subjects, but at the same time we shouldn't forget the creative economy, because the intellectual capabilities, cognitive capabilities are as important as creative abilities are. The right balance is what matters, and Europe has been doing well in this respect. And if this is a shared European commitment, we don't need to worry about the fate of the future generations. The other panels are dealing with issues no less important. I think for Europe it will be important not only to talk about the coming 2 or 3 years, but to make sure that the right decisions are taken in the long term. What we are experiencing today is a reaction to what started to happen from the year 2000 onwards, when we recall the crisis of 2002 and 2008. So we have to educate young people in a way that they can respond appropriately to such a crisis. I wish you a productive discussion. I hope you will have interesting things to take home to your parliaments, because it's the parliamentary debate that spreads among the people and that conveys the message of Europe to the populations of our countries. This evening we're going to offer a cultural program before the official Claude Monet exhibition is going to be opened. This week you will be the first ones to have a chance to see the exhibition, a preview of the exhibition. So I wish you a very pleasant and interesting evening in Vienna.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, für deine freundlichen Begrüßungen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your kind words of introduction. And I now hand over to Inge POSCH-GRUSKA, President of the Austrian Federal Council. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I too would like to welcome you most cordially on behalf of the Federal Council. In my capacity as President of the Federal Council, I'm particularly happy that this body exists, which brings together the chairpersons of the Finance, Budgetary and Economic Policy Committees of the parliaments of the individual countries. The issue is economic policy, governance and budgetary policy for the European Union. We have to discuss these issues and find a solution that is a good one for all member states of the European Union and the population of Europe. The Austrian Federal Council is the interface between the European Union and the citizens of our country. We're close to the citizen. The Federal Council is strongly focused on Europe, and it is a forward-looking chamber. As president of this second chamber, I'd like to tell you that the European Affairs Committee of the Federal Council is committed to EU affairs and makes full use of its right of participation. As regards subsidiarity checks, the Federal Council is one of the most active chambers in the European Union. Subsidiarity for us is an important fundamental principle of the European Union, but it must not be abused to push nationalist ideas. This is something I warn against explicitly. We all share a special responsibility. We have to address important future-oriented challenges. The confidence of citizens in the European Union, unfortunately, has declined in recent years. There are more and more critical voices, critical with regard to the European Union. I think we're all agreed that we have to regain people's confidence in the European Union. We want to strengthen this confidence. The European Union has to be resilient and well able to cope with crises without losing sight of the well-being of its citizens. Finding a balance between economic and social aspects, this is what makes the European Union strong. The European Union can show that economic growth, employment policy and social policy go together. Through interparliamentary conferences like today's conference on stability, economic policy coordination and governance in the European Union, enable national parliaments to engage in a lively dialogue, which I greatly welcome. So once again, let me welcome you to Vienna and wish you an interesting and successful conference. Madam President, thank you very much for your kind words of welcome. Before I give the floor to the Federal Minister for Digital and Economic Affairs, I'd like to give myself the floor and address you briefly. As I said at the beginning, it's a special honor and privilege for me to chair this Interparliamentary Conference. It has a long name, Interparliamentary Conference on Stability, Economic Policy, Coordination and Governance of the European Union. It's important because this title focuses on a very important function of the European Union when it comes to prosperity and competitiveness. I welcome you at the Austria Center, Vienna, which is the venue of almost all the conferences within the framework of the Austrian EU presidency. As you probably know, our historical parliament building is being renovated and refurbished. This is going to take several years, and therefore a beautiful parliament building is currently not available for such events. I deeply regret that because it's one of the most beautiful buildings in Vienna along the Ringstraße. We are at a huge conference center which is ideally equipped for this conference. At the same time, while we are meeting here, about 2,000 students of the University of Economics in Vienna are taking an exam in business administration, and I'd like to wish these students all the best for their exam. I hope I'm speaking on behalf of all of you when I say that. It's great to see so many of you here. I know you have a tight schedule and a date in the middle of September, after the summer break in the national parliaments and in the European Parliament, is not the best one. It's very early in the year, but I'm glad that so many of you have come here nevertheless. And we've won a large number of distinguished speakers from the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the national governments and the national parliaments for this conference. So I'm sure we can look forward to a very substantive conference. As far as the topics are concerned, they're very broad, including financial, budgetary, economic policy issues, the complexity of the mechanisms which have evolved, especially since the financial crisis of 2008. These mechanisms had to be implemented, but they have to be discussed. They're important and necessary, but nevertheless, in such a heterogeneous community of states such as the European Union, they need to be continuously improved and simplified. A certain degree of concentration will be necessary, and this is what we're going to talk about today and tomorrow. As the chairman already said, at European level, we want to promote cooperation and open markets, but on the other hand, we are confronted with protectionist developments on other continents that make economic cooperation difficult and have an unfavorable influence both for individual continents and for the world as a whole. At European level, the multi-annual financial framework is being discussed for the years starting 2021. This is not an easy task, particularly with a view to the forthcoming elections to the European Parliament. It's a race against time. Nevertheless, it's important for us to deal with this topic. Let me briefly say a few words about the 4 sessions of this conference. The fiscal policy framework for the European Union is an issue that is being discussed continuously. It calls for deepening and simplification. The most recent financial and economic crisis clearly showed that apart from a common monetary policy, we have hardly any common instruments for fiscal policy stabilization. In the meantime, a few of them have been implemented. And we had to learn our lessons, and therefore it's particularly important for us to deal with this topic here today. In the second session, we will be talking about investment, innovation, and education as drivers for a more competitive Europe. New research programs, the European Innovation Council, the Connecting Europe facility, and other issues will have to be discussed. Session 3 will be dedicated to the combating tax evasion. There is tax competition, which is okay. It's acceptable to have tax competition because the systems differ from country to country, but we need fairness between countries and tax subjects on the one hand, and this means that we have to fight against everything that prevents such fairness. This is a task for all of us. No country can solve this problem by itself. And then there is the issue of digitalization and its impact on employment. Another very important topics, because there are fears and anxieties among the population on the one hand, but on the other hand, we're not making full use of the opportunities that arise. It's our task as politicians to take people's fears and anxieties away and to find solutions. And I'm convinced that it is possible to find solutions. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot to be discussed, and I'd like to invite you to engage in this discussion together with us today and tomorrow. I look forward to interesting discussions, but before we enter into the individual panels, I would like to ask the representative of the Austrian government, the Federal Minister for Digital and Economic Affairs, Margarete Schramberg, to take the floor.
Thank you very much, President of the National Council, Madam President of the Federal Council, Chairman of the Finance Committee, ladies and gentlemen.
I hope you are having a good time and having a lot of good discussions here in Vienna.
It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you today to the opening of the Interparliamentary Conference on behalf of the Austrian federal government. This event shows how important direct exchanges at parliamentary level are, not only nationally but also at European or international level. The focus topics that you selected are excellent, and being the Minister of Digitalization and the Economy, the session devoted to the digitalization and its impact on jobs, the job situation and education is particularly interesting to me. We have a lot to do for the European Union and for the people who live in this European Union, and we have the best prerequisites. I think we can be proud of what we have achieved together in the past and of what we are going to achieve in the future. Austria has been having the EU Council presidency for 3 months. There are numerous challenges ahead because next year, in the first quarter of next year, as we know, there will be the elections to the European Parliament, and because many things have been successfully completed by then. We count on your committed support and on the committed support of everyone involved in the processes leading to EU legislation. The motto of our presidency is a Europe that protects. And that protection does not only refer to security and the fight against illegal migration and the very important issue of Southeastern Europe, but it also refers to securing prosperity and competitiveness through digitalization. For us, our motto also means a very clear statement on strengthening the subsidiarity principle. We need a strong Europe in the big questions, and we need less Europe in the minor questions. Let's give the decision-making power to the local authorities and national authorities where they can do it, and let's leave the grand questions to Europe. As far as we are concerned, we will provide the greatest support in order to make progress altogether. The EU is still the leading trading power and the largest internal market of the world, and I think we should be aware of that. Our share in the worldwide GDP, however, and our economic clout are dropping. And this is why it's our common task to make any effort to make sure that we can compete with other continents in global competition. We have to create the best possible prerequisites for the next generation, for our children and for their children. If we want to secure our prosperity and our competitiveness, we have to make progress when it comes to innovation and digitalization. Let me just give you some insights into my own focus area, for the two councils, competition and trade. The first focus is a new EU industrial policy. The figures reflect the importance of the European industrial policy. In Europe, industries secure 52 million jobs, directly and indirectly. And that is 1/4 of European employment. In Europe, industry is responsible for about 50% of all exports and 65% of all investment in research and development. We have to pursue an industrial policy that is also involved in environmental protection and consumer protection, and that stands up to the challenges of the new digital transformation. It's about artificial intelligence and robotics. Why is that so important? Because it's a great opportunity for us to bring back industries to Europe that we had lost in the past. We are talking about the reindustrialization of Europe, for instance, in the semiconductor industry. Recently, there was a very nice example because Infineon is a company that now invests 1.6 billion in Austria and not in Asia or the USA. A second example is First, a steel-making industry, the most digitalized steel works of the world, that is going to be built in the mountains of Austria and Styria. And First decided to do that because of the availability of skilled labor. And since now labor cost is no longer the thing that tips the scale in this decision. And I'm sure that you will have examples that are similar in your own countries. We have to make use of all the opportunities and make sure that Europe has the competitive edge, because it's the companies that create jobs. It's not policymakers. We as policymakers have the task to make sure that the framework allows companies to do so. I spent the last 22 years of my life as a CEO in the industry, and I've been in politics for 9 months, and I have seen all the big IT companies migrate to other continents, the hardware and the software manufacturers. It is now our task to make use of the transformation to bring them back to Europe in order to create jobs here in Europe and in order to be networked with other global markets. The second big focus area is digitalization and the digital single market. We have to make sure that as many dossiers as possible can be completed successfully. The annual added value from this area is 415 billion euro for the European economy. Let me just single out two focus issues. One, the platform to business, which means a task to support and protect the SMEs in Europe, support them against big international competitors. We have created a legal framework in Austria that can serve as best practice. And in cooperation with you, we want to create good prerequisites for SMEs. The second area is public sector information. Making use of public information in a way that it supports basic research and applied research, and makes it possible to make the best possible use of the results of that research, laying the foundation for successful developments in European basic research and in applied research. This is why The Digital Europe program is something that we consider as excellent, and we have to make sure that it advances rapidly, both when it comes to artificial intelligence, robotics, digital innovation, and most of all, the digital skills. And that takes me to the third focus area, one of the most important ones: your children, your grandchildren, your nephews, and your nieces. They are all concerned because they are preparing to enter the world of work. But it's also important for those who have already retired from the world of work. Everyone needs to be supported in going the path towards the digital world. We have picked this out as one of our greatest interests, namely the dual occupational training that exists in some countries of Europe, but not in a sufficient number of countries in Europe. I would ask you to take this home to your countries. This is our offer. Let's work together. We are going to offer workshops into the system of dual occupational training here in Austria, a system that also exists in France or in Germany. And this dual training makes it possible for young people to have an apprenticeship in companies, which opens the way to the digital know-how that they need. But on the other hand, they are also attending school in order to be part of the educational system. We have to foster digital skills because all studies at the European level show concerning results. There is a lot to do. About 40% of the European population has no digital skills or just minor digital skills. And it is our task to make all efforts at school, in the world of work, in reskilling and after work to combat this. We have to accept the challenges of the digital transformation, and we are going to give you every support during the EU presidency and afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is of concern to all of us. It was Jean Monnet who said, "Europe has never existed. One must genuinely create Europe." And it is our task to build Europe further for the next generations and to build on the basis built by our fathers and grandfathers. We have to protect the future against the past. Thank you very much.
Frau Präsidentin, herzlichen Dank.
Madam Minister, thank you very much for your words. Mr. President, Madam President, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for taking the time to addressing the participants of this conference. While I am saying goodbye to the presidents, I would ask Professor Tügessen, Professor Haber, and Mr. Karas to come up to the podium. Please keep seated. I'm just going to interrupt this conference for 1 or 2 minutes only.